This business is operating illegally. Shut it down now or we will open fire." Officer Derek Bradley barked as he charged through the garage door of my BBQ joint. His hand hovered threateningly over his holstered weapon while 30 startled diners, who'd been laughing over plates of smoked brisket just moments before, fell into stunned silence. Out front, Karen Sullivan stood triumphantly, her phone raised like a trophy. That smug grin stretched across her face as if she'd just conquered her greatest enemy. She expected me to fold quietly, to back down in fear, but Karen had made a fatal error in judgment because at that exact moment, while they were ready to fire, I held a secret powerful enough to turn the entire situation on its head. And by the time she realized who she was messing with, the damage would already be done. What unfolded in my garage that Saturday evening was chaos like I'd never seen. Bradley, flanked by 2 other officers, barged into Mitchell's backyard BBQ at the peak of our dinner rush. Families were gathered at picnic tables, happily enjoying plates of my slow-cooked specialties. The panic hit instantly. Mothers clutched their children and bolted for the exits. An elderly man toppled over his chair in his rush to flee, and untouched plates of perfectly spiced meat were left behind in the frenzy. My 9-year-old son, Tyler, who had just been proudly pouring sweet tea for guests, sprinted to me, tears pouring down his face. He wrapped himself around my legs and screamed, "Don't shoot my daddy. Please, don't shoot my daddy." His terrified cries pierced through me like a blade, but I forced myself to stay calm, even though rage threatened to boil over inside me. "Everyone on the ground, now!" Bradley barked again, his expression almost gleeful as he watched the panic spread. "This place is operating without permits and disturbing the peace in a residential zone." I slowly lifted my hands, and not because I believed a word of his accusations, but because I'd learned the hard way that confronting an armed officer in front of a panicked crowd usually ends badly for everyone. It wasn't lost on me that just 8 months ago, this very garage had been a cluttered storage space filled with old furniture and dusty holiday decorations. But after losing my job as a software engineer at Google during their massive round of layoffs, I had turned it into something meaningful, something that made people happy. What had started as a desperate attempt to cover bills had evolved into a beloved little spot where neighbors came together, families made memories, and the scent of hickory smoke became part of the neighborhood air. The road to that moment started with the worst season of my life, when my wife Sarah lost her battle with cancer 2 years prior. In those last weeks at the hospital, when we both knew our time was running out, she looked at me with those fading but still beautiful eyes and said something I'd never forget. "You're brilliant at engineering, and you made a great living as a lawyer before that, but when you're out back with that smoker, watching people's faces light up as they taste your brisket, that's when you come alive. Promise me, broken bar, if something happens to me, you won't just survive. Make people happy with your food." I made that promise through a storm of tears, never thinking it would become the foundation for everything to come. After she passed, I buried myself in work, using my tech career to mask the grief. But when Google let go of my entire department, I was left jobless, a single father to a 9-year-old, with few options in a saturated job market. That's when I remembered Sarah's words and took the biggest leap of my life. I turned our 2-car garage into a functioning kitchen. I installed commercial-grade appliances, proper ventilation, passed every health inspection, and secured all the permits the city required. Within 6 months, Mitchell's backyard BBQ had become a hidden gem. Folks were willing to drive 20 minutes just to get a taste of my Kansas City-style ribs and signature bourbon glaze. But not everyone appreciated my success. Karen Sullivan, a self-declared queen of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, had ruled the neighborhood for nearly a decade with an iron grip. From the day I opened, she was determined to see me shut down. She came with sound meters to measure the noise from happy conversations. She took photos of every car parked on the street, claiming it created traffic issues. She even filed complaints that the smell of my smoked meats was dragging down property values for the entire subdivision. I tried to reason with her. I explained I was running a fully legal business that brought the community together. But Karen wasn't interested in reason. The woman outside my garage that night, enjoying every second as the officers frightened my guests, saw me as an outsider, a threat to her precious vision of suburbia. At home meetings, Karen always sounded polished and rational, but her words carried an undercurrent of exclusion of anyone who worked with their hands, anyone who didn't meet her definition of professional, anyone who pursued a dream that didn't align with her ideals, didn't belong in Maplewood Heights. She used her role as HOA president like a weapon, twisting policies and selectively enforcing rules to bully anyone who didn't fall in line. As I stood there with my hands in the air, my son trembling against my leg, and our customers scrambling to escape, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about my restaurant anymore. This was personal. Karen had crossed a line by dragging my son into her vendetta. What she didn't know, or what she couldn't even begin to comprehend, was that she'd just declared war on the wrong person. She thought I was just a mild-mannered cook. But I had resources she couldn't imagine, skills and secrets that would soon send her perfect little world crashing down. That night, I had no choice but to shut the restaurant down. A broken bar. I closed up that night, sent dozens of disappointed customers home, and took a hit of nearly $2,000 in lost weekend revenue. But as I watched Karen stroll away with a smug grin still glued to her face, I made a decision that would alter both our lives forever. She wanted a war. Well, now she was going to get one, and she was about to find out that she had picked the wrong target. To Karen, I was just a failed tech guy clinging to a backyard BBQ stand. What she didn't know was that the man behind the smoker knew more about the law than most people who made a career practicing it. Her biggest mistake was assuming I was just another rule-bending small business owner, but that assumption was about to cost her. What Karen Sullivan didn't realize while she basked in her so-called victory that Saturday evening was that she had just picked a fight with someone whose legal background came from one of the most elite institutions in the country. The irony was sharp. While she stood outside my garage, gloating about shutting down what she saw as a makeshift operation run by a desperate nobody, she had no idea she was going up against a Stanford law graduate. Before I ever put on an apron, I spent 6 years as a corporate lawyer, and before that, I had made my mark as a software engineer. My shift from attorney to coder to pitmaster wasn't just a job change, it was a promise fulfilled, a vow I made to the love of my life in her final days. I remember that moment with Sarah like it was yesterday, though it's been 2 years since cancer took her. That last week in the hospital is burned into my memory. The room carried that sterile smell hospitals never quite mask, the sharp scent of disinfectants clinging to the underlying sense of illness and sorrow. But Sarah, even in those final days, saw through all of it. She always did. No matter how much I hid behind professional titles or busy routines, she understood what truly brought me joy. "Jack," she had whispered, her voice faint but steady over the hum of machines, "you've been successful as a lawyer, and you're brilliant at engineering, but I've watched you for 15 years. I know when you're most alive, it's when you're standing over that smoker in the backyard, watching people's faces light up when they taste your brisket, hearing families laugh together. That's your gift, honey, bringing people joy through your food." She made me promise, right then and there, that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't just keep going, I'd find a way to share that joy with the world. That promise carried me through the darkest stretch of my life, when simply getting out of bed felt like a mountain, and raising Tyler alone felt impossible. I clung to those words. After the funeral, I buried myself in my tech job to keep from falling apart. But when Google cut my entire department during a massive downsizing, I stood at a crossroads. That's when I remembered her words and found the courage to act on them. Transforming our garage into Mitchell's backyard BBQ wasn't just about survival or making ends meet. It was about honoring Sarah, about living up to the belief she had in me when I couldn't see it myself. Every brisket I slow-cooked, every neighbor who came back for seconds, every family that gathered at my picnic tables was a piece of her legacy. Keeping her spirit alive one meal at a time. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a coffee and pretending to research HOA code violations on my laptop. But in truth, I was diving deep into legal strategies using the knowledge I had gained from some of the top legal institutions in the country. And sure enough, my instincts were right. Digging through the HOA documents, I found what I had suspected from the beginning. Our community's HOA covenant, written way back in 1995 and never formally revised, it didn't include any language prohibiting home-run businesses operating inside a private garage. In fact, The original agreement encouraged small-scale entrepreneurial ventures that provided value to residents and built community bonds. That meant Karen's entire campaign to destroy my business rested on a completely hollow legal argument. Later that same morning, I received a call from Karen herself. Her tone was falsely polite, dripping with a kind of arrogant superiority that only reinforced what I already knew about her. "I hope you understand now that people like you don't really fit in places like Maplewood Heights," she said, her voice oozing condescension. "Running a greasy food stand from your garage might be acceptable elsewhere. But here, our residents have certain expectations and standards. I think you'd be better off finding a location more suited to your type of clientele." That last line stuck with me. Your type of clientele. The implication was crystal clear. She believed my customers, people who enjoyed good food in a laid-back setting, were beneath her and her pristine neighborhood. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know about Karen's true agenda. What infuriated me more than her classist attitude, though, was the emotional toll she inflicted on Tyler. After the chaos the night before, I found him alone in a corner of the restaurant, his small frame curled up, tears still falling as he tried to make sense of what had happened. "Daddy, why does that mean lady hate our restaurant so much?" he asked, his young mind struggling to comprehend the adult realities of control, resentment, and discrimination. "Did we do something wrong? Are you in trouble?" Watching him ask those questions with the innocent confusion that broke something inside me. That same afternoon, I sat at my desk and began drafting what would become the first in a series of legal actions against Karen Sullivan. The cease and desist letter I wrote was a work of precision. I cited specific HOA provisions, referenced case law concerning residential businesses, and laid out in no uncertain terms that any further harassment of my family or interference with my licensed operation would trigger immediate legal action. The tone was direct and professional, never angry, but every sentence made it clear. Karen was no longer dealing with someone she could push around. She had crossed the wrong man, and this time, I was ready to fight back. Later that evening, while Tyler was flipping through our wedding photo album and asked if Mommy would be proud of our restaurant, I felt Sarah's spirit so strongly it was as if she were standing right there beside us. "Yeah, buddy, she'd be proud," I said, gently ruffling his hair. But my thoughts were already shifting, realizing that this battle with Karen had grown into something much more than a dispute over permits or HOA politics. This was now about honoring a promise, protecting my family, and standing up to someone who thought she could crush the legacy we built in memory of someone we loved. Karen's biggest mistake: she thought I was just another guy who would fold under pressure. What she didn't realize was that the man she had challenged had capabilities she couldn't even begin to understand. Her ally, Officer Derek Bradley, made his real motives known the following Monday morning. He showed up on my doorstep alone. No backup, no official pretense, just him and his unmarked patrol car parked in my driveway like a threat. The smugness in his stride as he approached my front porch left no doubt. This visit wasn't about enforcing any real law, it was personal. And what I learned during that tense exchange revealed just how deep Karen's network of manipulation ran and how far they were both willing to go to destabilize my business and disrupt the safety of my home. "You think you are clever, don't you, Mitchell?" Bradley sneered, his voice teetering on the edge of controlled rage. "Writing up all those fancy letters, pretending you're some kind of legal expert. Let me tell you what I know about your type." The contempt in his voice wasn't about a zoning dispute or a restaurant complaint, it was old, festering anger. And as he kept talking, the real reason behind his vendetta became sickeningly clear. 3 years ago, during a routine code review at a tech startup, I'd uncovered major flaws in their payment security systems. As any responsible engineer would do, I reported the issues. The company had to delay their launch by 6 months to fix it, and when funding dried up, layoffs followed. One of those laid off, Tommy Bradley, Derek's younger brother. 15 developers lost their jobs, but in Derek's eyes, I was solely to blame. He didn't see a professional doing the right thing, he saw someone who had cost his brother his future. "You and your perfectionism ruined his career," he growled, stepping forward in a clear act of intimidation. He had a family to feed, but Noah, you had to play the hero. "Well now, I'm going to make sure you learn what it's like to lose everything." In that moment, It became terrifyingly clear that Derek wasn't just helping Karen out of loyalty, he was out for revenge. This wasn't about enforcing HOA rules or city code violations. This was a man with a gun and a grudge, convinced I had ruined his family's life, and now using his badge to settle a personal score. And then came the most chilling part. He casually brought up the fact that Tyler walked to school every day, same time, same route, past the same corner. He gave a small, cold smile. "It's a dangerous world for little kids," he said. "Never know what might happen when no one's around to look out for them." That line made my blood freeze. Later that day, I began the kind of in-depth background research my legal education had prepared me for, a quiet, methodical, and thorough. What I found in Officer Bradley's record was as disturbing as it was unsurprising. Over the past 5 years, he had racked up 12 formal complaints. Most were for excessive force. A clear pattern emerged. His aggression was usually directed toward people he perceived as part of the elite educated professionals, especially in tech. 3 of those complaints led to suspensions. 2 required court-ordered anger management. 1 resulted in the city quietly settling out of court to avoid a lawsuit. Digging deeper, I found neighbors who had seen Karen and Bradley meeting regularly at a local diner over the past few months. Always discreet, always during off-hours, clearly not romantic. Karen, after all, was still married to her wealthy banker husband, Robert. It was an arrangement mutually useful. Karen wanted someone with a badge who could bully and intimidate where HOA rules couldn't reach. Bradley needed someone with access, someone who could feed him information, provide social cover, and point him at the right targets. But Karen wasn't done. Later that week, her tactics escalated again, this time into digital warfare. Someone calling themselves Food Critic Anonymous had posted harsh, slanderous reviews of Mitchell's Backyard BBQ. They claimed my place was dirty, operating illegally, and not the kind of restaurant a respectable neighborhood should tolerate. The exact same text appeared on Google, Yelp, and Facebook. That repetition alone raised red flags. And sure enough, when I tracked the so-called food critic down via email and social media, the truth came out fast. He was a 22-year-old college student from 2 states away, someone who had never even been to Maplewood Heights, let alone eaten at my restaurant. The most laughable part? Karen had paid him $800 to post that single fake review. Then he ghosted her and vanished without a trace when she tried to contact him for follow-ups. The kid had conned her. She paid for online fraud and got ripped off by a sophomore, probably using the money for beer and textbooks. Under different circumstances, the irony might have been hilarious, but the damage was real. That review was showing up in search results, deterring actual customers from visiting. Her campaign was no longer just personal, it was becoming economically destructive. And as I pieced it all together through Karen's scheme, Bradley's grudge, the fake review, I realized something deeply unsettling. This wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president lashing out. Karen had crossed the line from petty neighborhood politics into something much darker. This had gone far beyond typical neighborhood disputes or concerns about property values. Karen Sullivan's actions weren't just aggressive, they were calculated and criminal. She had no problem breaking the law, hiring shady individuals, and working with corrupt cops if it meant crushing anyone who dared oppose her. Karen wasn't just an overbearing HOA president, as she saw people's jobs, families, and peace of mind as acceptable sacrifices in her mission to rule her little suburban empire. What she didn't realize, however, was that I wasn't some helpless business owner she could scare into backing down. Every dirty move she made, every fake review she arranged, every backdoor deal with people like Bradley, I was documenting it all, thoroughly and quietly, like someone who had spent years in corporate litigation. She assumed I'd crumble under the pressure, but what she was really doing was giving me all the ammo I needed to completely dismantle her when the time was right. The turning point came after a long, sleepless night. I'd been listening to Tyler toss and turn in bed, still shaking from the incident where armed officers stormed my restaurant in front of our customers. The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee and watching my son idly push scrambled eggs around his plate without eating, it hit me: trying to fight Karen solely through legal means would drag on for months, maybe years. All the while, she'd keep escalating. I couldn't let her keep winning in silence. So I decided to go public. Thanks to social media, everyday people like me now had the ability to share our stories with the world, and no media filter, no gatekeepers. I created a TikTok account that morning and called it BBQ vs HOA Karen. My first video was a straightforward 10-minute explanation of everything that had happened since I launched Mitchell's Backyard BBQ 8 months ago. I stayed calm, presented facts, and showed my permits, health department approvals, and the HOA agreement that clearly allowed home-based businesses in our area. The response was instant and overwhelming. Thousands of people flooded the comments in outrage, sharing their own run-ins with power-hungry HOA leaders. The video racked up over 50,000 views in just 6 hours, and the hashtag #SaveMitchellsBC began trending in our area. But it was my second video, uploaded later that same day, that really set everything ablaze. While reviewing security footage from my restaurant, I came across a clip Karen clearly didn't know had been captured. In it, she approached a table of African-American customers who were enjoying their meal, and the audio was crystal clear. Her voice oozed with contempt as she told them, "You people are ruining this neighborhood with your loud music and trashy behavior. You're a broken bar. This kind of place doesn't belong in Maplewood Heights. And neither do you." I posted the footage on TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Within a day, the clip had been shared over 200,000 times. Comment sections lit up with people calling her everything from HOA Hitler to the poster child of suburban racism. Local news picked it up. Civil rights groups began demanding investigations into her role as HOA president. Just like that, Karen Sullivan found herself thrust into a national spotlight as a symbol of bigotry and unchecked authority. In response, Karen tried to take control of the story by launching an Instagram page titled The Real Karen Sullivan, a PR disaster from the start. Her posts only worsened things. One of her first uploads, featuring a clearly staged and expensive headshot, read, "I am not a racist. I donate to charity and have always supported diversity in our community." That only fanned the flames. The comment section exploded, with thousands reminding her that charity work doesn't erase racism, especially when there's video proof of harassment. And things kept spiraling. Karen's next move was hiring a crisis PR agency to clean up her online reputation. Unfortunately for her, she got scammed again. The firm she paid $5,000 up front turned out to be a group of teenagers running a fake business. They threw up a few fake positive reviews and disappeared, taking her money with them. Ironically, she copied me on some of her furious refund demands, handing me direct evidence of how easily she'd been conned. The political ramifications of the entire situation became clear when Councilwoman Sarah Davis stopped by Mitchell's Backyard BBQ for lunch. She brought along a photographer from the local paper and made it obvious she was publicly backing my legal right to run my business from home. Davis had always branded herself as a supporter of small businesses and working-class families, so her visit served both as a message of support and a savvy political move. Public support for my situation kept growing. One reporter even quoted a community organizer as she enjoyed a plate of my signature ribs, saying, "What's happening to Jack Mitchell is the perfect example of what goes wrong when HOA power goes unchecked." She emphasized that no family should have to suffer this kind of relentless targeting just for running a legitimate business that brings joy to its neighborhood. Things took a sharp turn for Karen when confidential HOA records were leaked. The documents exposed how she had long abused her position to go after families who didn't match her narrow idea of acceptable residence. The emails showed a clear and disturbing pattern of bias that stretched back for years, so she had routinely fined and harassed people based on their race, income, or sexual orientation, while conveniently ignoring similar rule-breaking from her wealthier white neighbors. What had started as my personal conflict with her now looked like part of a much bigger, more sinister issue, is something that national media outlets quickly latched onto, eager to highlight systemic discrimination in suburban America. By the end of that week, Karen had lawyered up, this time with a real attorney, charging $400 an hour to deal with what had spiraled into a full-blown legal and PR disaster. His first move? A cease and desist letter demanding that I stop posting what he called defamatory content about his client. Exactly the kind of scare tactic I had been waiting for. But here's the thing, Truth is the ultimate shield against defamation lawsuits. Every single post I had made was backed up by hard evidence that would stand up in any court in the country. When I sat down to draft my response to her attorney, I couldn't help but grin. In just 1 week, the woman who thought she could bully a down-on-his-luck tech guy into silence was now hemorrhaging money on legal fees and watching her name collapse across social media. And she had no clue that the worst was still ahead of her. Because the deeper I dug into her background as HOA president, the more disturbing evidence I uncovered, a proof that her campaign against me wasn't a one-time vendetta. And when she dragged my 9-year-old son into her schemes, everything changed. This wasn't just about property lines and citations anymore. It became personal. It all started on a Tuesday. Tyler came home from school, tears streaking his face, holding his backpack tight against his chest like a shield. He wouldn't tell me what happened at lunch. Not at first. It took almost an hour of patient, gentle questioning before he finally opened up. A few kids had cornered him near the playground. They'd repeated things they'd overheard from their parents, claims that Tyler's dad was a criminal, that I was stealing lunch money, and that our restaurant was a front for shady operations under police investigation. That was gut-wrenching enough, but what made it worse was knowing exactly who had planted those seeds. Karen had taken her harassment campaign into the schoolyard, spreading carefully crafted rumors among the parent circles at Tyler's elementary school. Whispered suggestions disguised as innocent concern, nothing traceable. She'd learned from her earlier mistakes and was now playing a much quieter, more calculated game. At school pickup and PTA meetings, she would casually say things like, "I'm just worried about the kids' safety. A broken bar. You never know who these home businesses might attract." Her tone was always calm, almost nurturing, but her words were poison. As I continued to dig into her record as HOA president, the full scope of her cruelty became undeniable. My family was not her first target, far from it. The first victims were David and Marcus Patterson, a married gay couple who had moved to Maplewood Heights 3 years earlier. Karen bombarded them with complaints of 17 documented violations, accusing them of loud parties and poor lawn upkeep. Eventually, they had no choice but to sell their home at a significant loss and move. Then came the Gonzalez family. Maria was a nurse, and her husband Carlos a mechanic who occasionally brought work trucks home. Karen accused him of running an illegal repair shop from their driveway and claimed their kids played too much loud Mexican music. After over a year of constant citations and legal headaches, they also packed up and left. The third case hit even harder. James Washington, a widowed veteran dealing with PTSD, had occasional nighttime episodes. Instead of offering support, Karen painted him as a threat to the neighborhood, reporting him repeatedly. Her complaints led to police involvement and, eventually, to Child Protective Services taking away his teenage daughter. The man lost his home and his relationship with his only child, all because Karen couldn't stand the idea of a grieving veteran living a few doors down. When I shared all of this with the community, the response was immediate and massive. The next weekend, I hosted a Unity BBQ festival at the local park. Over 400 people showed up. Many of them had never even visited my restaurant, but they came to stand together against HOA abuse, against discrimination, and for something better. Local pastors gave speeches on unity and compassion. Civil rights groups handed out flyers and set up booths to educate people on their rights. The atmosphere was electric, with food, music, and a growing sense that Karen's reign of cruelty was finally coming to an end. Several city council members showed up in support, standing firmly behind local businesses and advocating for diversity in residential areas. The festival ended up raising more than $8,000 to fund legal assistance for other families dealing with similar harassment from overreaching homeowners associations. Pastor William Thompson, who had become one of my strongest allies after witnessing Karen's antics at multiple community meetings, gave a moving speech that day. He made it clear this battle was about far more than permits or neighborhood disputes. "This isn't about barbecue or property values," he declared, his voice ringing with the gravity of someone who'd spent decades fighting for justice. "This is about whether we're going to allow bureaucratic bullies to abuse their power, hurt families, and push good people out of our neighborhoods. Jack Mitchell isn't just defending his business, he's fighting for the very heart of Maplewood Heights. The festival's most jaw-dropping moment came when Karen arrived in person, flanked by 2 private security guards she'd hired to monitor the unlawful event and document supposed violations of park usage policies. Her presence caused a ripple of unrest through the crowd. People instantly pulled out their phones, anticipating yet another of her public meltdowns. Rather than avoid her, I approached directly, making sure my voice could be heard by everyone. "Karen, since you're here, why don't you explain what you did to the Patterson family? Or maybe tell these people why you thought it was acceptable to sic Child Protective Services on a military veteran?" The crowd erupted almost instantly. Hundreds joined in a booming chant, "Karen, go home. Karen, go home." The chant lasted several minutes while Karen stood frozen, looking increasingly out of place and overwhelmed. Her hired guards, clearly unsettled by the scene, eventually persuaded her to leave the park before things could spiral further out of control. As I watched her retreat into her luxury SUV, I knew the tide had turned, but I also understood that humiliating her so publicly might push her to an even more extreme response. What I didn't yet grasp was just how far she was willing to go and how much danger that would bring to not only my business but to my family's physical safety. Karen's next move was more sinister than anything she'd done before. It exposed the full extent of her cruelty and set in motion the very events that would lead to her downfall through the very legal system she once tried to use against me. The call that upended everything came at 8:47 p.m. on a Saturday, right in the middle of what should have been our busiest and most profitable dinner rush. I was standing by the smoker, watching the temperature on a fresh batch of brisket, while around 45 guests enjoyed their meals at picnic tables Tyler and I had arranged inside the garage-turned dining space. Laughter, the aroma of hickory smoke, and the quiet contentment of satisfied customers filled the air. It was exactly the kind of moment Sarah had dreamed of when she'd urged me to share my cooking with the world. And just for a second, I allowed myself to feel truly proud of what we'd created, even in the midst of the chaos Karen had tried to bring into our lives. Then the sirens started, faint at first, but growing louder by the second until it became obvious that multiple emergency vehicles were descending on our peaceful street. Our guests glanced around uneasily. A few stood, peering out the open garage door toward the flashing lights. And then all hell broke loose. 6 police cruisers and a SWAT van roared into the driveway, lights strobing red and blue like something out of a disaster movie. Officer Derek Bradley led the charge, rifle raised, bellowing commands that seemed more designed to terrify than maintain control. "Armed robbery in progress. Everyone on the ground now." His voice carried the weight of someone used to asserting dominance. But there was something else in it too, something personal, vindictive. This wasn't just about protocol. Behind him, more heavily armed officers poured into the space, treating our small BBQ spot like a drug den full of dangerous suspects, not a backyard restaurant where grandparents had been quietly sharing brisket with their grandkids. Panic erupted. 45 innocent people were suddenly on the floor, hands behind their heads, while men with guns barked orders above them. I watched in horror as elderly couples lay beside sobbing children, as if we were criminals. A pregnant woman at one table wept uncontrollably while her husband tried to shield her. Teenagers who'd been taking selfies moments earlier were now being zip-tied, their faces white with fear. But the image that will haunt me forever was Tyler, my 9-year-old son, who had just been proudly handing out sweet tea before the chaos started. Now he stood frozen against the wall, eyes wide in terror, tears pouring down his cheeks. "Please don't kill my daddy," he screamed again and again. His voice trembled with a raw, gut-wrenching fear no child should ever have to feel. "We don't have any weapons, we just serve food. Please don't hurt him." Bradley seemed to feed off the panic, smirking as he drove the barrel of his rifle into the back of my head and shoved me to my knees in front of the very people who had always supported our humble restaurant. "Where's the weapon, Tetch boy?" he sneered, using the same mocking nickname he'd flung at me during previous confrontations. "We got a report of an armed robbery, shots fired, multiple suspects, so where are you hiding the guns?" The accusations were so ridiculous, They would have been laughably if not for the terrifying reality that things could spiral into real violence. All around us were innocent customers, families just out for a peaceful Saturday night meal. But what Bradley and Karen hadn't accounted for in their reckless scheme was Mason Torres, a regular at our place and a well-known local food blogger who had been live-streaming his dining experience on both Facebook and TikTok when the chaos erupted. His phone kept recording the entire ordeal, catching every brutal second as officers stormed in, guns drawn, traumatizing patrons, including small child Rena, all based on a completely fabricated emergency. By the time anyone realized what was happening, over 3 million people were already watching the live stream. Outrage spread like wildfire across the internet, with viewers sharing their footage far and wide. The comments flooded in messages of shock, support, and fury calling out the injustice unfolding in real time. Phrases like "This is police brutality," "Save Jack and Tyler," and "Karen Sullivan is a monster" lit up the chat feed. Within minutes, #Mitchell's Crate began trending nationwide. What started as a neighborhood feud was now a glaring example of unchecked power and systemic abuse, broadcast for the entire world to see. Things hit their most dangerous point when Bradley, clearly frustrated by the lack of any evidence, escalated his threats. He pressed the muzzle of his weapon against my temple, the cold steel digging into my skin as Tyler watched from across the room, frozen in terror. "One wrong move and that's it," he growled into my ear. "Your kid's going to see you die tonight unless you start telling the truth." That's when Mayor Patricia Williams arrived like divine justice in human form. Her official vehicle pulled up behind the SWAT van just as CNN began streaming the chaos live. Having picked up Mason's footage, a former federal prosecutor and fierce defender of civil rights, Mayor Williams took one glance at the scene and wasted no time. "Stand down, now," her voice cut through the noise with unshakable command. "There's no robbery, no weapons, and if you don't lower those guns this instant, every one of you will be suspended pending full investigation." Even Bradley couldn't ignore the force of her authority. Then CNN's camera crew appeared, transforming our garage into the epicenter of a media storm that would dominate headlines for weeks. Reporter Jennifer Martinez began broadcasting right from our driveway while SWAT officers were still inside, calling the scene an outrageous abuse of police power against a family-run business relentlessly targeted by corrupt neighbors and local authorities. The spotlight was both empowering and terrifying. Yes, it meant justice was finally within reach, but it also meant that our private nightmare had become public spectacle, streamed for millions. When the officers were finally ordered off our property, I clutched Tyler in my arms as he trembled with the trauma of what he'd just witnessed. Karen Sullivan hadn't shown her face during the verdict, but I had no doubt she was the one who'd phoned in the bogus emergency that nearly got innocent people killed. Now, the entire world had seen her for who she truly was. And it was time she faced the fallout of the war she had waged. 6 months after that horrifying night when armed officers stormed our restaurant over Karen Sullivan's Lee, I stood in a federal district courtroom, waiting for the verdict. This verdict would determine whether justice truly had a place in America. The months leading up to it had been a whirlwind filled with depositions, countless interviews, and legal wrangling as my case became a symbol of the broader struggle against systemic abuse of authority in neighborhoods across the country. During the 3-week trial, the evidence we brought forward left little room for doubt. Karen's text messages exposed a direct link between her false emergency call and Bradley's violent raid. Email records detailed her calculated targeting of minority families throughout her reign as HOA president. There was documented proof of her phony blog scheme, fake health inspections, and a smear campaign against my son Tyler at school. Altogether, it painted a damning portrait of a woman who had weaponized her position to enforce a narrow, exclusionary version of suburbia. Judge Margaret Chen delivered her ruling with the kind of ethical clarity our community had been missing for far too long. "This case illustrates the dangers of unchecked authority and discriminatory practices in residential neighborhoods," she said, her words echoing with significance that would reshape whole law for years to come. The defendant's actions went far beyond a simple violation of Mr. Mitchell's civil rights. They struck at the very core of fairness and equality in a democratic society. The financial judgment surpassed even my most hopeful expectations. Karen was held personally responsible for $2.1 million in damages for civil rights violations and emotional harm. Officer Bradley was ordered to pay $800,000 and was also facing federal criminal charges. The Maplewood Heights HOA itself was hit with a $300,000 fine and required to undergo federally supervised anti-discrimination training. But justice wasn't just about the money. Karen's public image was completely shattered. Her marriage fell apart in a bitter divorce that left her nearly penniless. Her own children disavowed her once they learned the full extent of her racist actions. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood like a tyrant now lived in a trailer with her elderly mother, working as a cashier at Dollar Tree, ironically forced to wear a badge that read, "Hello, I'm Karen," a fitting twist of fate for someone who had inflicted so much pain under the guise of community standards. As for us, Mitchell's Backyard BBQ became more than just a local restaurant. We expanded to 6 locations across 3 states, pulling in over $3.5 million annually through restaurants, catering, and media partnerships. My memoir, From Code to Coals, A Father's Fight for Justice, spent 18 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. The CNN documentary, The BBQ Battle That Changed America, not only earned an Emmy nomination, it also became required viewing in law schools across the country. Tyler's transformation was perhaps the most meaningful victory of all. Once a terrified 9-year-old afraid police might hurt his dad, he grew into a proud 11-year-old who confidently told his classmates, "My dad beat the bullies." Even Maplewood Heights underwent a radical change. Residents ousted Karen and voted in a diverse HOA board focused on inclusion. Meanwhile, the Jack Mitchell Legal Defense Fund began helping families nationwide take on similar fights against corrupt community leadership. Each year on the anniversary of Sarah's passing, Tyler and I visit her grave with fresh flowers. "You think Mom would be proud of us, Dad?" he asked once. I nodded, smiling through the weight of everything we'd endured. "Yeah, buddy," I said. She'd say we gave the bullies exactly what they had coming. I had one final run-in with Karen not long after. I spotted her behind the counter of a gas station, her designer outfits replaced by a basic uniform. She murmured a quiet, "I'm sorry," without meeting my eyes. But I didn't accept Ida, not for me. Tell that to the Patterson family, to the Gonzaleses, to James Washington, I said, because this wasn't just the story of one man refusing to be broken by a corrupt system. This was about what happens when regular people decide enough is enough, when they gather evidence, shine a light on the abuse, and fight back with everything they've got. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it finally arrives, it's sweeter than Kansas City molasses. And for every Karen out there tormenting her neighbors, remember, karma is the finest seasoning of all. We all fear those who abuse power, who threaten our families and peace of mind. We dream of the day justice finally arrives. Jack's story shows that ordinary people can stand up to corruption and win. Just document everything, stay smart, and never waver in your pursuit of what's right. If this story of fighting back against injustice moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Ya Story Essa, where the underdog always gets the last word. And to everyone who has fought to reclaim joy, peace, and dignity in their community Essa, especially those who faced battles in April, this episode is for you. At Ya Stories, our mission is clear. We fight corrupt hoes, one story at a time.